I don't know who they are, but they always seem to forget that you always have this kind of slow and steady input of new readers. Someone is always going to go to the bookstore and pick up their very first vampire novel. So they've never read one before. And to them, it's all new. It's all fresh. They're going to pick up their first paranormal romance. Why zombies are seeing a resurgence and why romance has never died out. You know, I think romance, when I was a teenager, I read a lot of romances, and I burned out on them, not because I began to dislike them, but they're kind of cyclic like everything else. They go through a time period where they use a certain plot, and then they move on to a different plot. And when I was reading them, they had this plot thing going where you'd have the hero and the heroine meet, and they would have this love-hate relationship, and they would spend like 35 pages together, and then they would spend 450 pages apart. And then 20 pages at the end, they were together again. After a while, I got pretty old, and I kind of stopped reading them after that.
Pretty alien to the modern.
Yeah. But you know, I imagine that's changed, and it's probably gone through different phases, just like horror and zombies and vampires and paranormal romance and urban fantasy.
I think the whole thing, everybody mocked Stephanie Meyer for having these sparkly, celibate vampires, but that was actually really different. Whether you like it or want to barf your guts out and really feel Christian, but that was different. And I think a lot of teenagers, especially who are immersed in an area in which they are constantly expected to have sex, whether they want to or not. You know, the whole idea of the hookup and friends with Benny.
It's just sex.
That it's just sex, and it's just saturated in it. And we're talking about an age group in which a lot of people aren't ready for that, even though they're expected to be, and that there's a lot of parental pressure probably still not to do that. Something like that. There's actually something really sexy about a guy who won't do it with you.
I think you have, some teenagers, whether they'll are over there saying, that's kind of cool that they actually think it's important.
Important to not immediately, as opposed to like
not immediately, but just that it is an important thing, and it's not just a throwaway night here and a throwaway night there. It's an important thing, because once I do this, there's no going back,
Yeah.
I'd like to ask Jill a question, since you work in a bookstore. In your opinion, with the exception, say, of Jim, who is a New York Times author, and maybe Moni, and I can't remember her name, with her Faith Fever series, who's New York Times, which sells better in your Barnes & Noble, paranormal romance or urban fantasy?
I'd say it's pretty equal. Romance always is going to trumpet. Romance is the best-selling thing we have.
Huge readership.
It does.
It's 50% of the
But a lot of
market.
people are buying both.
Okay.
And I recommend, when I see somebody with urban fantasy, I'll recommend a couple of the paranormal romance.
Yeah, they've been
or
good.
vice versa, because they're very good and they're getting better. Urban fantasy, I think, has really come into its own, and it's like just solid. Most of them that I pick up are just very, very good. Paranormal romance, a lot of them are, but the overall quality is just really going up, which I love to see.
Thank you.
Frank, in general, in genres, do you feel that quote-unquote formulas are a straitjacket, or are they actually kind of helpful for launching your story?
Depends on the writer.
I think you write what you want, and let the marketing people at the house deal with it.
I mean, if this is something that you're just kind of, experimenting with, I think it gives you the basic structure, but if you've been doing it for a while, I think you're going to say, okay, look, I have this thing, and it used to be nice when he had black hair, and it was kind of long, and, some orange.
You're going to get more mileage out of that.
But I've been doing some invited anthologies lately, and one of the, the Badass Fairies was one where the editor came to me and said, well, we're looking for different stories of these types, and she said, in this particular case, we're looking for a story about Amazon Fae. And I was like, what the heck are Amazon Fae? I started looking into that and researching it, and after a little while, I ended up coming up with a story idea that I ultimately sold to them. So to some degree, if you do have an editor that's posing an idea to you, that can actually generate a good story.
Yeah, I think it's something that it all depends on how the writer handles it. I mean, if the writer does a good job with telling a story, even if it's the Romeo and Juliet again, it can still be a good story. If they don't, if they don't do it right, then they're formula and cliche. If they do it right, they're archetypical and classic.
Starting a whole new movement.
A regenerating movement that has gone, quote unquote, stale, yeah.
Like vampires, yeah.
This is completely not related at all to the topic at hand, but would anyone at this table like a beverage? There's water in the back. I'm happy to grab you some water.
What?
Yeah. I just realized. With the clause, all three.
We have a question there.
So,
what we're getting at.
So in writing urban fantasy, is it your guys' experience, is it problematically you come across like doing really well-known mythological tropes or things where it's like you have people who are like, well, that's not what fae are supposed to be, or that's not, that angel that you use, that's not his function in biblical terms. Is it better to be like, well, no, this is my version and this is how I'm gonna tell it, or is it, if you're gonna use an angel's name, it should be in keeping with what at least somewhat of the actual mythology would be, the real mythology, even though that's ridiculous.
Well, I think if you're using things that have known references, you had better know what they are, because I see a lot of writers who will appropriate words without paying any attention to the resonances, and of course you've probably read books like that, and that's why you're bringing this up. So you spend all your time tripping over the usage, because there doesn't seem to be any reason to do that, right? But when I'm writing stuff, I do it my way, and it's my way. I'm God in this universe.
I think to play off of that, one of the things I've done with the vampires, for instance, is one of the most common questions I get is, what vampire universe are your stories in? My vampire universe. But the fact of the matter is what I've done, what I had done was read a lot of vampire stories, saw a lot of good old Hammer films and Universal films and things that way, and got to really know the genre. And vampires are so big and such a broad universe. That one's a kind of easy example, but that's even true with when I started writing the fairy story. Is I've pretty much broken every rule in the book, I think, with both sets of characters. But at the same time, I knew what those characters were, and I knew what I was breaking when I was breaking them, and I tried to do it in such a way that people wouldn't trip over it.
Yeah, you should know what if you're doing something and you're breaking well-established rules or beliefs, you better know that you're doing that. You better have some idea that you can make it make sense, make your work make sense.
I kind of like to do stuff like, you're writing the story or whatever you're seeing you're writing, and from the character's point of view, you go, well, throughout history, everybody always thought that demons did this, but they really did this. And then wipes out all the history and do it my way. How it really happened according to my universe and my character.
Yeah, I do the same thing. I do a lot of demons, but I make that clear. But I also make really, really sure that I have internal consistency through all of my series. It's like, oh yeah, like if I'm going to set these rules, I better follow them, because I hate that when authors do that, and it throws me right out of the story.